is a briefing by Police Chief Sean Duggan regarding the City of Chandler community policing and public safety response. Chief Duggan. Good to see your better half here tonight as well.
That's right. It's our date night. First time we've been together in 2 weeks. So,
what a date. Wow. I can't think of a better way to spend it.
Right. All right. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. As you know, it's been a very busy and challenging past couple weeks. So what I'd like to do this evening is to first provide a summary of events and then address some of the issues and concerns expressed by some members of our community. So following the absolute horrific and tragic death of George Floyd while in police custody on May 25th, I shared my thoughts with our entire organization, and I talked about how our department, how we value the sanctity of all human life. And I talked about our tactics and our training and reminded our employees that our success over the years has been predicated on the level of trust and support and respect that we've earned from our community. And I also reminded them that each of them are key components to earning that trust and respect. And I told them of how proud I was for what they represent to our community and how our community relies on them every single day to keep them safe. That was on May 28th, and obviously a lot has occurred since then. So what I'd like you to know and our community to know is how your police department responded to the national and local crisis in the most noble and professional way. Let me go back now to Friday, May 29th. So after watching some of the communities across the country ignite in protest and violence, including right here in the Valley, we placed a number of our personnel on call for the weekend so we would be prepared to respond to an emergency if need be. And then on Saturday evening, May 30th, Scottsdale Police Department put out an emergency call for assistance to the entire Valley because they were experiencing looting and rioting in their downtown area. Chandler Police Department sent over 40 officers from our SWAT team and from patrol to assist Scottsdale Police. They returned safely to our city just after around 5 a.m. the next morning. We as a department immediately sent additional personnel to secure our own mall, not knowing the intentions of the looters and where they may strike next. And by Sunday afternoon, for the first time in the history of the Chandler Police Department, we were fully mobilized with hundreds of officers in uniform on duty, standing guard at the mall and other key locations throughout the city. We stood up our emergency operations center and coordinated with the fire department and worked with other local, state, and federal law enforcement partners to ensure that we were prepared to provide assistance or request assistance if needed. Later that day, the governor issued a state of emergency, mobilizing the National Guard and implementing a curfew from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. That evening, we received National Guard units who, for the preceding 9 nights, worked alongside our officers, helping to keep our city safe. And it's the first time in my nearly 34 years of policing I've seen or witnessed the National Guard mobilize in our community. So I want to thank General McGuire and all the guardsmen who worked alongside our folks for 10 days. From Monday, June 1st through Tuesday, June 9th, we continued our enhanced presence at the mall, and we also safely managed 4 protests in our downtown, as well as a number of smaller protests throughout the city. We were committed to ensuring that people could safely practice their constitutional rights to protest. During the course of that week, I had an opportunity to meet with many other protesters outside our main station. I expressed how proud I was of them for peacefully practicing their constitutional right to protest. And I told them that their voices were being heard and that we were here to keep them safe. And overall, it was a very positive and respectful event, encounter. And then one of the group influencers asked if I would walk with them to show support for justice and equality. And then a few of us then walked with the group on Arizona Avenue up to Galveston and back. And we had opportunities to engage in meaningful conversation and listen to the concerns of the demonstrators, many of whom either attended or were attending Chandler High School. Additionally, we heard a lot of support and appreciation for the police department. We continued with our enhanced staffing through the evening of Tuesday, June 9th, and over the course of the 11-day deployment, we made no arrests related to protests or demonstrations in our city. So first, I'm very proud of how our community came together, how they responded, and how so many people took to the street and had their voices heard in a very peaceful way. And I'm especially proud of the men and women of our police department. Their actions over the past 11 days have made an indelible impression within and outside our community. From our initial response to help Scottsdale PD on May 30th, to safely navigating a number of different protests in our downtown, they provided endless reasons for Chandler to be proud of their police. Now, we realize the national crisis has highlighted a number of issues and concerns. And first, we know there's a lot of work to do. We must continue our dialogue and ensure that people are being heard. We must continue to seek out ways to improve and do things better. And we must continue to treat people with dignity and respect. Now, I realize there's been a lot of talk lately about reform. Chandler Police Department has been in a constant state of reform and transformation for many years. We continually seek to improve and update our policies and procedures based on evidence-based practices. For example, following the riots in Ferguson in 2014, President Obama convened a task force to identify best practices in policing. In 2015, he released the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing final report. Upon its release, we reviewed the recommendations to determine where improvements could be made to our policies and procedures that would help strengthen our partnership and our trust within the community, and also demonstrate that we hold ourselves to the highest standards of performance. Although it was clear that the vast majority of those recommendations in the report had already been in practice in our department for many years and really part of the fabric of our organization. But we were committed to implement other strategies that will enhance our interactions with the community, such as we revised our use of force policy, and we included de-escalation, we included the duty to render aid. So if there's a violent confrontation between an officer and a suspect, once that confrontation is over, even if that person was assaulting the officer, once that confrontation is over, our officers have a duty now to transition and now render aid to that person. We also added a duty to intervene. So if any officer is on scene and observes another officer act outside of policy or law, they have an obligation to go in and take corrective action. And we added a life statement to our policy where we recognize the value and sanctity of all human life. We also, as a result of this task force, went on to train 33% of our department in crisis intervention training. We also then posted our policies and procedures online on our website for the public to view to promote transparency and understanding. We joined the Police Open Data Initiative, where we post our use of force statistics, our arrests and calls for service, and raw data on our website. Another recommendation that was discussed was to embrace the department's history. So we then developed a curriculum for newly hired officers examining the history of the Chandler Police Department and specifically lessons learned from the 1997 Immigration Roundup and the impact it had on community trust. The overwhelming majority of officers today in the Chandler Police Department were not present in 1997, but the overwhelming majority of families that were affected by this in 1997 are still here. So we want to make sure that our officers have an understanding of our history. And these are just a few of the task force recommendations, a few examples of the recommendations that we implemented. But the reality is we were already practicing many of the recommendations, including the implementation of a civilian review committee. And again, in fact, we've had this panel on police use of force and complaints review board for the past 20 years, and those members are appointed by the mayor and approved by members of council. And in 2016, we were invited to go to the White House as an example of a model agency where Assistant Chief Zadilla represented our department and spoke on how we reviewed and then subsequently implemented many of the task force recommendations. So that was a great point of pride for our department. In 2018, we added a policy requiring all officers to document anytime they point their gun at another person. And just this year, we expanded our body-worn camera program where we issued camera now to all our patrol lieutenants, our gang unit detectives, our criminal apprehension unit detectives, and even members of our SWAT team. In addition to all that, we have been an accredited agency since 1996, and we were the first department in Arizona to receive the gold standard accreditation with excellence. And we are assessed every 3 years where people come into our organization and they look at hundreds of proofs of compliance and to ensure that we are following the standards. And part of adhering to standards is to ensure that we hold each other accountable. And over the last 6 years, we have had officers make mistakes, as all human beings do. And many of those mistakes were, well, they were correctable through training or coaching. However, some of those mistakes were not. And we've initiated termination proceedings on 16 police officers, including supervisors, over the last 6 years. But when you look at the majority of complaints over the course of any given year, the majority of complaints are generated from within the organization. For example, last year we conducted 32 internal investigations on our employees. 5 of those were complaints generated from citizens. 27 of those complaints were generated internally by employees. Employees holding each other accountable. That is the culture of the Chandler Police Department. We are deeply committed, as we have always been, to serve our community with in a fair and a just and certainly equitable manner. And we've spent decades earning your trust and support. In fact, that is the cornerstone of our system of policing. And despite all the challenges we face this year, we're not even halfway through this year. And we've had to deal with the COVID pandemic. We've had 3 officers shot this year. We've had 10 other officers shot at. And now we're dealing with this recent crisis. But regardless of everything that's happening, you will see Chandler Police embedded everywhere in this community, working alongside all of our residents, helping to make our community safe. So I want to thank you for your support, and I'm certainly open to answer any questions you may have.